My name is Rita. I'm an adult nurse within the emergency department in the UK. I get asked a lot of questions on how to answer possible interview questions around conflict resolution. So today we'll be focusing on conflict resolution. The first thing I want us to understand is that most times we always have to link our answer to the NMC code of practice. Now, the one code that conflict resolution revolves around is promoting professionalism and trust. Now, the first possible questions you might tend to have around conflict resolution might be, okay, tell us about a time that you were involved in a conflict and how did you handle it? Now, the first thing I want you to understand is that promoting professionalism and trust has to do with making sure that you do things the right way based on your trust values and the NMC code of practice. Now, the first thing I would do in that situation is two questions that you've been asked. So tell us about a time that you've been involved in a conflict and how did you handle it? Now, your first answer should focus around telling a story around a time that you've been involved in a conflict. Well, the second question is around telling us how you were able to resolve the conflict. Now, most people tend to miss out the first part of telling the interview panel of a time that they were involved in a conflict. Now, if you don't have any examples, practical examples, I would tend to tell the interview panels that I have never been involved in a conflict, but if I were involved in a conflict, these are the things that I would do if I were to be involved in a conflict. It shows that you have knowledge of what to do, even if you've never had an experience in that. Now, first of all, you tell the interview panel of a time that you've been involved in a conflict, and if you've never been involved in a conflict, you tell them that I have never been involved in a conflict, and if I ever get into a conflict situation, these are the ways that I would handle the situation. Now, the first thing you have to do is ensure privacy. So you call your colleague who you are having the conflict with to a private and quiet place. Now, you need to stress the private and quiet place because it is very important. Do not say, I'll call my colleague aside, because aside could mean that you have people at the corner, chatting or talking. You could have someone by the side. So you call your colleague to a quiet environment where there is nobody. Yeah, you try to find. Then the second thing you do is you try to find out what the problem is. Now, depending on the situation, if it is a very heated argument, I would suggest you call an extra person into the quiet place just to keep both parties safe. Now, you go to a quiet place, you've tried to find out, the second thing you do is try to find out what the problem is. That's the second point you make. Then the third point is, if you are unable to resolve the problem there and there, you escalate to a more senior person than you, which in this case might be your line manager. So you escalate to your line manager. Now, that is one way to answer that question. Now, there is another question that could probably pop up in terms of conflict resolution. Now, they might ask you, so tell us, so you come to work, they will give you a scenario. So you come to work and you find two of your colleagues arguing in front of a patient. Now, how would you handle such situation? That is a conflict resolution question. Now, the first thing I would want to do in that situation is to call my colleagues to a quiet and calm place. Now, I'll try to find out what the problem is. That's the second thing you do. Try to find out what the problem is, what is the reason for the conflict. And if you're able to resolve it, that's fine. You send them for a training, a conflict resolution training to refresh them. They might know, but they need a training refresher. So to refresh their knowledge on how to handle conflict within the workplace. Now, if I'm unable to resolve the conflict, the next thing I would suggest you do, or if you're unable to resolve the conflict, the next thing I would suggest that you do is escalate to your line manager. But definitely your colleague would need further training on conflict resolution. And the next thing is the patient, because they had a conflict around the patient. So the next thing you'll be looking to do is to go in to apologize to the patient. So I would suggest the next point is to apologize to the patient. So you go to the patient and apologize to them for what has happened. And if they have any complaint, if they want to make any complaint to the hospital, you direct them to the necessary place to make their complaint, which in this case in the UK it's called PALS. So you direct them to PALS to make any complaint that they might have about having to witness nurses have conflict in front of them. So just to summarize, in terms of conflict resolution, when you're answering your question, it has to be centered around promoting professionalism and trust. Your first answer should be calling the parties or going to a private and quiet place. The second point is trying to find out what the conflict is. Then the third point is, if unable to resolve, escalate to your line manager or a more senior person. Now, if the conflict occurred in front of a patient or in front of patients and it was not handled in a professional manner, then your colleagues or you or whoever was involved in the conflict needs to go for a refresher training on conflict resolution. Then for the patients, you tend to apologize to them and give them the necessary details to make complaints if they would so wish to. Now, these are the ways that you could possibly answer your conflict resolution questions. Thank you very much for listening to my talk on possible interview questions. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel down below and comment. Tell me the next possible questions that you would like me to talk about in my next video. Thank you.